criteria. Oh, got it. Okay. Another criteria that we use to determine if a species is of greatest conservation need is if they are a stewardship species. So a stewardship species is any species that has a large percentage of its population or range in Alaska. So these trumpeter swans, I took a picture of these guys at Potter Marsh last fall, and they would be considered a stewardship species because a large part of their continental breeding population comes here to Alaska. And also, since, as I just mentioned, the entire global population of the Alaska hare is also in Alaska, they would also be considered a stewardship species. And then another criteria is if a species is a sentinel species. So a sentinel species just means that they're species that are considered indicators of ecosystem health or environmental change. So this is a king eider here with a big orange face and a common eider with a green neck. These are examples of sentinel species, as are Alaska hares. And so this concept is, I think of it as the canary in the coal mine. Sometimes if there's any significant changes in the population or health of a sentinel species, then it can be viewed as an early warning sign of changes in the environment. And having these types of warnings to environmental change can be very useful tools in identifying and addressing these problems early, and then using that to make the appropriate management decisions before the problem gets worse and starts to affect other species that are maybe not as sensitive as the sentinel species. So very useful. And the last few criteria for species to be considered of conservation need, I'm going to do 3 at once here because they're kind of related. So we have species that are culturally, economically, or ecologically important. So culturally important species, like the snowy owl here, they are also species that could be considered important subsistence. And then economically important species are those that are harvested commercially, fur bearers that aren't hunted or trapped, and the economically important species are also considered culturally important. And another example of economically important species would be this red admiral butterfly here, because they're a pollinating insect and they support ecosystems and vegetation through that role. And then the very last is the ecologically important species, like this little Arctic ground squirrel here. And they're considered ecologically important if they are a prey, important prey for other species or a keystone. So that would mean that their population health has a lot of influence on the food web around them because so many other species rely on them. So this ground squirrel, for example, is prey to a bunch of different species, golden eagles, ermine, foxes. And if its population declined, then it would have an effect on everything around it and could cause a cascade through the ecosystem. So that's a little overview of what species are considered of conservation concern in Alaska. And then, as I mentioned before, from that list, we prioritize those species that need the most attention and research. So I've given kind of a big scope here of what our team does and how we work and what we do. So now it might surprise you all to know that there are only 10 of us. We have Tracy here, our fearless leader in South Central. And then we have our endangered species team on the left there, Moira and Janelle in the Southeast. They're the ones who review potential species listings. And then they also work on red knots, Aleutian terns, and pollinating insects. Then moving along, we have Karen and Tori also in the Southeast. They work on bats. And then Katie and I are in South Central, and we do research on lesser yellowlegs, collared pika, and more bats. And then our interior team is Travis, Chris, and Julie, and they work on Alaska hares, golden eagles, and olive-sided flycatchers. So this might seem like a really small group for such a statewide approach to conservation in Alaska. So what really makes all of this possible then is that we have all of these conservation partnerships. So we don't do all of this alone. We partner with a bunch of different organizations and we share resources and data, and we help tackle all of these really complex conservation issues so that we can make the best possible management decisions. So we partner with NGOs like Audubon, federal agencies like the US Fish and Wildlife Service, and then academic institutions like UAA, so we can all work on these problems together. So by coordinating with all of those different organizations, we can then kind of ensure that we're managing everything with the best available science. So I mentioned what our team did a slide ago, with all the little projects that we're working on. And so now I was going to go into a bit more detail on what some of those projects were. So for the active ones we got going on right now, we've got our interior with Chris and Travis and Julie. They're up there in the middle with golden eagles and flycatchers and hares off in Western Alaska. And then Katie and I are in South Central, so we're in Hatcher Pass and on the Denali Highway doing collared pika, and then lesser yellowlegs in the Anchorage area, and then little brown bats in the South Central area. And then we have our Southeast team working on the terns. That fieldwork is going on in Western Alaska, and then red knots pollinating insects and bats in the Southeast. And this little collared pika here, that's one of our research subjects that we were working on this summer. I'll be going to get into what the little tags that she has in her ears in a second. But I wanted to start by going over some of the research that our interior team is doing up here in Fairbanks. So this project is the golden eagles. This is one of our first projects. So this is Chris and Travis, the winter team. They're with the eagles. And so golden eagles, they live out in the open country of Ventura, Alaska, Arctic and alpine tundra, and they are considered a species of conservation need because they are a stewardship species, and they are also under threat. And they are considered under threat because of the development of wind energy across the country. So wind turbines are set up in open windy spaces, obviously, which is also what is considered golden eagle habitat. So there's kind of a threat of collisions there with golden eagles. And so we wanted to reduce this threat as much as possible. And so we needed up-to-date information on the migration routes of golden eagles to see where they were traveling and how that might line up with future development plans. This can be really valuable because migratory species are really creatures of habit, and sometimes just moving a turbine 300 feet to the left is out of the way of a historic migration path, and that can make a huge difference. So that was one of the priorities. And then there also hadn't been updated population count in a while. So the last count that we had of golden eagles in the state was in 2009, and it was about 2,400 eagles. So everyone knew that that number probably wasn't accurate anymore, and we needed more accurate population count and migration routes. So to do this, Chris and Travis needed to capture a bunch of golden eagles and put GPS tracking devices on them to follow their migration routes. And this was a little bit difficult at first. Eagles are very smart and they're very hard to catch. And as we go along here, you might notice that a lot of the species we work with have this in common. They're kind of a pain in the neck to work with sometimes, which is why there might not be that much data on them in the first place. So to capture them though, to overcome this problem, most eagles will migrate out of the state in the winter, but sometimes some of them stay if there's enough food around. So those eagles that were sticking around are the ones that Chris and Travis were capturing. So they ended up making a fake wolf kill site out in the tundra to kind of lure in the eagles. They made it look like wolves killed a moose, and it would be a good scavenging opportunity for the eagles. And then when the eagles would fly in to investigate, they would launch a net over them and then go and pick them up and put GPS trackers on them and then release them back into the wild. And this ended up working really well. Over 3 years, Chris and Travis caught 69 eagles and put trackers on 53 of them. And then they also did a eagle population count and were able to get a more up-to-date estimate on how many eagles breed in Alaska during the summer. So the results of this study, they were able to find out that Alaska actually hosts nearly 13,000 golden eagles in the summer, which is a quarter of the entire continental population, and it was way higher than anyone had previously thought. So that was big news. And then they were also able to get a better idea of the migration routes that the eagles were using as well. And this is all pretty new. This just got published last month in the Journal of Raptor Research. So this is yeah, December 2021, brand new article with all this research. It's very, very exciting. And I think Kelsey might have a link to that paper in the chat if anyone was interested in following that. And then this is also an example of one of the migration routes from Travis and Chris's paper. The black dots here along this line represent the GPS locations of eagles during their passage, and it kind of makes this visible migration track that you can kind of see. So that's what they were using to find out where the eagles were going. And I've got a little short video here of one of the golden eagles being released after getting a tag on them, and we'll see if this works. Could be a little glitchy, but it's cool to see how big the eagles are. Some golden eagles can have a wingspan of 6 to 7 feet, so it's kind of just neat to see them next to a person like that. There we go, released back into the wild. Oh, let's see. Okay, there we go. So I also have this 3-minute video here that goes into a bit more detail on the Alaska hares, those really giant bunnies that I was talking about earlier. This is research that Chris and Travis are also doing in the interior, but the video itself, the sound is a little glitchy. So I'm thinking maybe I will just have Kelsey put the link to this in the chat because it's on our Facebook page, and it might work better if anyone who is interested watched it there. So it's pretty fun though. It's got some footage that Travis took last winter of the hare research they get to do. And it involves snow machining for like 600 miles and tracking these gigantic, super rare bunnies in the dead of night. So it's got some pretty cool footage in it. So that'll be on Facebook. Anyone is interested in learning more about the Alaska hare. And so staying on the subject of mammals a little bit, but jumping down to South Central into my territory is the pika, colored pika. Here we go. All right, so these little mammals are super cool because they are alpine lagomorphs. They are in the same order as rabbits. And when I tell people that I work with pika, I usually describe them as mountain hamsters because that's kind of what they look like. They're pretty small and round, but they actually aren't rodents at all, and they have more in common with the Alaska hare, which is also in the order of lagomorph. Even though they're pretty small, you can hold them in your hand pretty easily compared to that gigantic tundra bunnies. So yeah, it's kind of fun. But they're very ecologically interesting because for their behavior is they spend all summer collecting vegetation to store in what we call hay piles, a big pile of grass and flowers and leaves. And that is their winter food pantry. So they will scuttle around all summer and pick up mouthfuls of leaves and grass and flowers, and they will just pack it all into these different hay piles underneath rocks. And we even found one this last summer that I think had 13 different hay piles in this one area. They work really hard. And they do not hibernate then. They just spend all winter running around under the rocks in snow and living off of their food storage in their hay pile. And so living under the snow is really important then because it has all these insulating properties, and the temperature in a pika den under the rocks, it can sometimes be 30 degrees warmer than the winter air temperature outside. It's wild. So they are considered a species of conservation need because they are ecologically important, and they are also an indicator species of changing alpine ecosystems. So what we want to know about them is how they will respond to future temperature changes, hotter summers, less snowpack, rain on snow events, things like that that could change. How resilient is their diet? What do they eat? How might they respond to any changing vegetation? And we want to estimate their survival, get a better understanding of their ecology, and predict how they would react to a changing environment. So we've caught almost 200 pika in the last few years, and I have a video in a second that kind of shows how we catch them. And what we do to estimate survival, you can kind of see this picture here. We put these little tags on their ears. Let's see, this little red tag right there. And they're color coordinated by the individual. So that little female there, for example, she has a red in her right ear, lime green in her left, and she is the only one with that color combo on her little mountainside. And pika are very site loyal, and they tend to stay in the same territory. So if we go back to the same spot next year and we use our binoculars to see a little pika running across the rocks, and she's got the red in her right and lime in her left, then we know that that is specifically that pika and that she has survived another winter. And then we kind of pair that with putting temperature loggers in their hay piles to monitor how that changes over the season. And then we also use game cameras to see what they're bringing to the hay piles and who else is stopping by. There's predators like ermines, and there's little interlopers that like ground squirrels and marmots and other pika that come and steal from hay piles. It's all very dramatic. And yeah, our South Central pikas are doing pretty good, got pretty high densities. So I've got a picture of a hay pile here. This is one that I took last summer. I think we ended up tagging this little female with double red ears. That's one of her hay piles. She had a ton of them scattered all over the place. So you can see that she's just smooshed all of these plants underneath the rocks, and she's got a little mouthful of plants right there. They just run back and forth on the rocks all day with mouthfuls of flowers. And so we were also kind of interested in the species of plants that they were smooshing under the rock there and what exactly they were collecting and what they preferred. So to do that, we did what we called cafeteria trials. So the cafeteria trials, we wanted to see how broad their diet was. And so we offered them a bunch of different plant species to see which ones they seemed to prefer. And they seemed to like alpine forage, so like little flowers and willow, and they did not like evergreen shrubs and grasses. Let's hope this works. I got a little video of a pika that we put down some offerings for to see if they would go for it. But it's kind of fun to watch because they just completely stuff their mouth with as many leaves and stems as they can. And it's kind of like when you refuse to make one trip to bring in all the groceries and just put them all on one arm. That's kind of what the pika do, but like all the time. They just carry a lot. And then this is some footage that I got of us trying to capture a pika. Here. So this is the setup that we use to track them and put ear tags on them. So you can see the little female collared pika here. She was kind of just keeping watch on that top of that rock in the distance. And that's actually her hay pile that she's sitting on top of. Her is right underneath the rock in this little area. You can kind of see her running. She just ran right into it. And so we put out a bunch of fireweed and willow leaves here. There's the red fireweed and some willow leaves. And then we put a bunch in this little metal trap off to the left. And what we want is for her to walk into it, step on a little pressure trigger, and then the door will close behind her. And then we can put some ear tags on her and take her weight and some hair samples and then let her go again. So we tried to catch her for several hours, and she finally did walk into another trap off camera. So I didn't get footage of that. But we did get her, and we put, I think she ended up being right ear turquoise, left ear yellow in that little region. So I guess we'll go back next summer, and she should be just in that same little spot, not going into the on-camera trap, of course. That's it. Yeah, there we go. All right. So on to another project. So I'm going to be moving on to birds now, but going back to the interior. And that next project is Olivesided Flycatchers. So this project is actually really exciting because Julie here in the picture up in Fairbanks, she's been working on this project for almost a decade at this point, and the final paper is being published next month. So this is a culmination of a lot of work here. So these little olive-sided flycatchers, they are aerial insectivores, and they live in wetlands across the state. They eat really big flying insects like dragonflies and bees and things like that. They can be a little hard to spot sometimes. You can see that they're kind of olive and gray, so they kind of blend into the trees a little bit, but they have a really recognizable call. So if you're ever out in the wetlands or the marsh and you hear a little like quick 3 beers, that's olive-sided flycatcher. That can be a good way to find them. And the reason that the flycatchers are of conservation need is that their population is under threat. So across their entire range, they've declined 78% in the last few decades, and they're considered near threatened globally, and we don't really know why. So this is their range map here from allaboutbirds.org, and you can see from here that they spend the summers breeding in Alaska and kind of up in this region. And then this is their migratory spot, and then they winter in South America. So they have a really big range. Excuse me. So what Julie's team was trying to find out then was if there was any threat to the population in Alaska, what was their survival and breeding success here, what was their migration route to the Americas, where did they go, what were their stopover sites. So as they follow the coast of North America down there, what spots did they tend to congregate in to refuel and rest before they kept going? What was important to them? And so to answer all of these questions, Julie's team studied their breeding ground up in Fairbanks, their food availability, their nesting success in Alaska, and it was actually good news. They found that once flycatchers get to Alaska for the breeding season, they actually seem to do quite well up here. So that's why they kind of wanted to pair this with following the flycatchers out of the state to sort of get this bigger picture of what was happening. And so to do this, just like with the golden eagles, they had to capture some Olivesided flycatchers and put geolocators on them to track their migration route. I'll show that in a second. And geolocators are fun because they measure the light as birds cross latitudes, and then they use that to store their location data. But one of the drawbacks to that is that you need to recapture the bird to get all the data back. And if you can't recapture them, then that data is just kind of gone. So like the golden eagles, flycatchers are also very smart, and they can be hard to catch twice because they learn to recognize you. So once again, there's not too much studies on them because they're a pain in the neck to study. So let's see. Yeah, but Julie was able to recapture a bunch of flycatchers on their way back and actually get this data. So let's see. I hope that's moving for everyone. That's a GIF, but you can kind of see this is the geolocator data of the flycatchers moving down through the Americas, through Central America, and then staying here to winter. So you can kind of, follow the population as it goes along, which is really interesting. And then this is a picture of the geolocator on one little flycatcher's back and the little tags that get put on their feet so that we know who they are. So this is I just really think this project is amazing because these little tiny kind of gray and olive birds that Julie caught near Fairbanks in the summer, they end up flying all the way down to South America, and they only have a 12-inch wingspan. They're not very big birds, but they have one of the longest migrations of any songbird in North America. And some of the preliminary data on this shows that they fly almost 24,000 kilometers in 95 days down to Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Brazil. So the paper on this is going to be published in February in the Journal of Animal Migration. If anyone is interested in following up on that, it's very cool. So I'm going to pop back over to mammals now with bats, all the bats of Alaska. So for this species, well, we actually have at least 6 species of bats here in Alaska, but most of them are only really in the southeast of Alaska, and only the little brown bat, which is this little fellow, is found in the rest of the state. And they've even found little brown bats as far north as Kotzebue. So if you see a bat in Alaska and you're not in the southeast, it is most likely this little guy. And they are very small. They barely have an 8-inch wingspan, and they're not too much bigger than a mouse, but they're very ecologically important because they're big insectivores in Alaska. One bat can eat over 1,000 insects or so in a night, or mosquitoes. So then if you just imagine a big flock of bats in a night, I am very glad they're here in the summertime. 6 species of bats. So they're considered a species of conservation need because they are sentinel species, which again means that they are indicators of ecosystem health or environmental change. And this is because bats are pretty sensitive to temperature changes, and they're pretty slow to reproduce. They only have 1 pup every year. So that means that any drastic changes in their population can really be an early warning sign of environmental change. So we kind of want to keep an eye on Alaska bats. Southeast and South Central is where the research that we are doing on them is. And another reason that we are keeping an eye on them is because they are potentially under threat from Whitenose Syndrome. So Whitenose Syndrome is the result of an invasive fungal pathogen that affects hibernating bats and causes them to wake up during hibernation and then burn through all of their winter stores because they keep kind of waking up when they shouldn't be. And eventually that causes them to die of dehydration. And it is really just kind of decimating the bat populations in the eastern United States. And it's been kind of slowly moving west in the last few years. So we haven't found it in Alaska yet, but we want to be prepared just in case it does ever start to move. So that means that if we want to manage the bats in the best way possible, then we need to get more of a baseline of their population and kind of get more data on how many there are around. And that way we can notice if there's any major changes in the future. So we're doing this in the southeast and the south central of Alaska by using tagging and tracking to find their hibernation sites, and then citizen science monitoring and acoustic monitoring. So citizen science, and let's see, I'll go into more detail here. So in the southeast, Karen and Tori, who I mentioned before, they have been tagging bats and using scent detection dogs. This is Jack right here, one of our scent detection dogs. And he has been successful in tracking bats back to their hibernaculum or their hibernation sites. And then we pair that with monitoring, which we also do in South Central. And this involves putting recording devices out in bat habitat, devices that only pick up high frequency bat calls that are undetectable to human ears. I think I got one here actually. Let's see. Yeah, one of these little guys, this little bat recorder. Put these out on the trees to pick up their high frequency calls. And then if we go through that data, then we can kind of find out when they come out of hibernation, when they go into hibernation, when they're foraging, when their pups are born, what habitats they frequent. So yeah, all useful information. And we've actually got some good news from this research too. We found that Alaska's bats don't really hibernate the same way as the East Coast bats. So the East Coast bat populations, the ones that are really kind of suffering from Whitenose syndrome right now, they all hibernate in these really massive caves together with thousands of bats in one spot. So it's really easy for the fungus to just kind of spread through the population. But what we found through this research is that Alaska's bats don't hibernate that way. They hibernate in really small numbers and kind of disperse. So they'll be in little rock crevices, they'll be in trees, abandoned cabins, old sheds, sometimes just a few at a time, which means that they're potentially much less vulnerable to Whitenose syndrome if we ever start seeing that. So that's some good news going on there. And what's also really great about these bat projects is that a lot of these results that we've seen, they've been with the help of citizen scientists reporting bat sightings across the state and putting up monitors at locations where they know that there are colonies, or doing colony counts if they know that there's one on their property. And I think I think Kelsey might have a link actually for reporting bats if you ever see one, because that is always helpful, especially if it is a colony. You can just kind of fill out a little bat reports form online. And that helps us gather new information about our bat populations, which is really great. And speaking of citizen science, we have a couple citizen science programs going on. So we have our bat monitoring with our maternity resurveys and the acoustic monitoring. But then we also have our boreal bird surveys, which is the Alaska Birds and Bogs program. And this program has been going on since 2013. It has this really robust scientific design, and it involves local bird watching volunteers to follow a really specific protocol and help us monitor targeted species such as the Olivesided Flycatcher, but then also the rusty blackbird, lesser yellowlegs, loons, grebes, a bunch of different species. And This last summer, we had almost 100 volunteers, over 250 wetland locations, and over 2,000 observations and going strong. So we will be starting that up again near the end of April. And I think I had a link to that website, Kelsey's, but it's also on the TED homepage in our citizen science program if you want to know anything else about the Birds and Bogs project. So that is all kind of a good summary of a lot of the work that we've got going on at the TED program so far. And I wanted to kind of wrap up the presentation with a few ways that you can follow the program in the future or support it if you want to. So first of all, we have just come out with our brand new 2022 conservation stamp, and it's not online yet, but it will be soon. And we've been coming out with these every year to help support fish and wildlife research and education in Alaska. And this year's stamp is right here. It's by artist and scientist Bryce Robinson, and it is a blue throat. And about the blue throat, I really love blue throats because they're only found in western and northern Alaska because they winter in Eurasia. And then some of them cross the Bering Sea into Alaska for the summer to breed. And they eat insects and some seeds and fruit, and they build their nests on the ground in these grass tussocks and tundra shrubs. And then the males here have these really beautiful bright blue throats. And Alaska is the only place in the entire continent where you can find these birds. And they're also kind of interesting because they're really good mimics. They've been documented mimicking over like 50 different species of bird and other sounds across their range. So they're just this really neat little bird. And that's why I'm excited that they're on our 2022 stamp. And as I just mentioned, we've got our website here. So if you visit our website, I think Kelsey might also have the link to that. We've got some of the projects that I just talked about here, some of the citizen scientist projects that I talked about here. And then when our 2022 stamp is ready to go, it'll be on the support our program page. And then we also have some social media, and you can follow us there for new information on our field projects and new publications as they come out. And you can, and if you even just want to follow it for bird watching tips, we do that too. So right now our Instagram and Facebook are going strong. Our Twitter is in the process, but is not currently up. So don't go looking for that quite yet. But yeah, hopefully that'll all be up soon and you can follow some more of the research that we're doing. And that should be it. If anybody has any questions.
Thank you, Arin. This is Kelsey. This was beautiful. Did you take a lot of the photos in this presentation?
Yeah, I took most of them. I tried to credit the ones that I did not take.
Yeah, awesome. So some of those were just gorgeous. Very well done. Thank you for presenting. We do have some questions. We're into the Q&A portion now. If you have any questions, throw them into the chat, but I'm going to start off with some that were thrown in earlier. Laura wants to know, where is a good place to see and watch pikas in South Central?
Yes, so what comes to mind first is Hatcher Pass, because that's where we were doing a lot of our research. And if you go up to, I think it's Summit Lake, around Summit Lake, the rock slides around that area, you don't even have to get out of your car. I've heard them from just the road there. They have this really high-pitched squeak. It's kind of like it's like really indignant almost. The marmots have a super high-pitched whistle, but pikas are a bit more like kind of. So if you roll down your window and you hear that, there's pika around, and they're very small and fast. So sometimes the best way to see them is to just kind of look for movement out of the corner of your eye, because they'll just zip across the rocks. They're very well camouflaged if they're sitting still.
That's adorable. I've heard them and they sound just like what you said. That little like short burst. Someone responded and said the same thing, Hatcher Pass, Independence Mine. And then somebody asked, what is the relationship between pikas and marmots? Are they in the same area?
Yeah, I've definitely seen a lot of hoary marmots at our field sites. I spent a lot of time just kind of chilling in the rocks and watching the pika run by and waiting for them to go into our traps if they ever do. And the marmots are just right in the same area. They kind of crawl across the same region, all the rocks. They whistle in the distance. We catch them on our game cameras going into the pika's hay piles a lot. So they're definitely in the same area. I think the only relationship they really have is the marmot sometimes mess with the hay piles, but it's not, but yeah, they're just kind of coexisting.
That's funny. Let's see. Someone asked, regarding golden eagle collisions with wind turbines, what is the frequency or incidence of collision? Excuse me. Regarding golden eagle capture, any incidents or of mortality or harm to the eagles from capture procedures? So kind of a twofer in that one.
Oh, you know, I'm not sure of the specifics of that because I haven't worked directly on that project, but if you go to the website, there's a page on each project that has a lot more detail on each individual one, and then the team's contact is there as well. So Chris and Travis might be able to answer more specific questions about that project than I could with any confidence.
Awesome. Well, it sounds like a good point of reference to direct to. Great. Next, we have, are all of you on the TED team scientists or studying to be scientists?
Yes, we are all scientists or have biology backgrounds. I think of our the little team picture I showed there, everybody there has a biology background or a law background or something else to help with the program. But yeah, all wildlife biologists.
Awesome. Did you always want to grow up to be a pika expert?
I think I always wanted to be a wildlife expert, so pika fit in there pretty well.
It's a cute one to study. Can Whitenose Syndrome spread through any sort of human activity, such as getting spread like an invasive plant seed adhering to boots?
Oh gosh, I'm not like 100% familiar with like the specifics of it because it's not up here, but I think it can spread via humans like spelunking and activities like that. So I think that definitely might be a worry. So not here yet, thank heavens, but yeah, I think that might be part of it though, is humans spreading it from cave to cave.
That's what I heard in the past too on that. It's like boots and everything. So if that's a hobby to be cleaning your gear and everything. Let's see here. How frequently do you use Indigenous villages and peoples in your science or citizen science programs? What Indigenous partnerships do you use?
Oh, I don't know if I'm the best person to answer that question. I've been mostly focusing on the research. The partnerships are kind of other folks in the program. So that might be a question for the contacts on our website more, such as Tracy, but I know that we are working in a couple of places over the summer, kind of trying to involve citizen science with more local areas like that to kind of work with them for bat monitoring specifically is what we are doing this summer. Out in Klutna, we hope, doing some bat monitoring out there. So yeah, for more specifics, might be more on our website, but that's what comes to mind is a Klutna.
Very cool. That's awesome. Great. Somebody said they didn't notice any universities on the partner slide. Do you work with university grad studies on projects of interest to TED? Yeah, we work with a ton of different programs that I didn't put on the slide, but we still work with them. I know we work with grad students. We worked with someone from the University of Idaho this summer. We partner with UAA for a lot of different things. We work with UAF a lot. So we do work with a lot of universities. I just wasn't able to smoosh all the logos on there, but yeah, we work with different students for different projects all the time. Great. Do we know what the population trend is for pikas? We have seen many of them on the trail to Gold Cord Lake at Hatcher Pass.
Ooh, yeah. I know we're still kind of in the early stages, so we can't really say for certain where it's going, but we know that the South Central pikas have pretty good densities. So the South Central pikas are doing pretty good for, compared to the other locations in the state, but it's a little too early to kind of make definite trend predictions. So we'll, maybe we'll look over that data soon and there'll be a paper eventually.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Next, have you found that with the pika trapping that predators are taking note of trapping locations and increasing predation rates?
Not that I've noticed, because we move the traps around really often. We don't really have a spot that stays long enough for a predator to take notice. The longest that a trap would even be out would be like a day, and then the pika, we trap the pika and then we take the trap and leave. So I don't really see that as too much of a problem, just because they're not there that long. But we do see, I know we've seen ermine every now and again on the rocks, and then we catch them on our game cameras a lot. So the ermine are around, but I don't think the traps would be too much of an influence there.
I'm sorry if I missed it in your presentation. Do ermine prey on the pikas?
Yeah, they're one of their main predators. They're it's a little bit funny. We see them on the game cameras, just a pika zipping by, an ermine zipping by, pika zipping by, ermine. Yeah, they're in the same space.
I bet they hold their own though, with the feisty.
They're very fast. Yeah.
Great. Can you let somebody named Mitchell says, Arin, can you let the audience know that if they're looking for research experience, that the Eider project is looking for?
Speckled eider. Yes, we have a research project going on this summer with the speckled eider, which, in case anyone is unfamiliar, is a cool sea duck. And we are looking for crewmates this summer. If anyone would like to send an email asking for more details on that summer position with the science.
That'd be great. Yeah, spread the word. He also followed up and said that I believe the Whitenose Syndrome was brought to the United States by plunkers from Europe.
Oh, splunkers. Yeah. That sounds familiar. So that was what the previous question asker was saying about people bringing it in.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Mitchell. Let's see here. There's also sorry, I was going to say there is a link that somebody threw in for decontamination of gear located on a link that they added in. So if you are looking to keep Whitenose Syndrome at bay, there is that. Let's see here. Samantha asked, is that a paid position? Is there a link?
Yes, there is a paid position, and there's not currently a link. We're just asking folks to email us if they're interested. So I can just toss my email in the chat here.
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
Okay, yeah. Can just shoot an email if you're interested, but yeah, it's a paid position.
Awesome, that's great. Thank you for asking, Samantha. Linda asks, are the Arctic hare a completely different species than snowshoe hare?
Yep, they are two separate species. And honestly, when I first heard about them, it was kind of funny because I was talking to Travis and he's like, I work with the Alaska hare. And I'm like, oh yeah, I've seen those. And he's like, no, you haven't. Like, they are giant and they are very elusive and they are out on the open tundra, and like very few people have seen them unless you're in Western Alaska. So they're they're super cool animals, but they are different from the snowshoe hare. And you don't really think about that unless you see them together, like I had in that one picture, and they're just massive. It's kind of fun.
We just had some trivia Tuesday this week on the Alaska hare.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, how many litters do they have in a year? And they only have one, apparently, which is very unusual compared to most hares. Let's see, any other questions? Any guesses why the Alaska hare are not doing so well?
You know, that's kind of the subject of the research right now. They've been working with a lot of residents and locals in the area of Western Alaska who have just from their own observations that their population seems to be going down in my own experience. So there's that's just there's just kind of the question they're trying to answer right now about if it's from the subsistence or if it's from environmental, or it could be a number of different things. So that's yeah, kind of just the subject of the research. Can't really say for certain at the moment. Hopefully we'll know something in the future.
Great, thank you. And I don't see any other questions coming in. We're just coming up on the hour. I do have one last comment. I know we're bouncing back and forth a little bit, but someone mentioned, I believe Toby, Whitenose Syndrome has been established in King County, Washington for a few years now, and wouldn't be a big jump to Alaska with shipping traffic. So keep our eyes out.
I think Washington's the closest that it's gotten in the last few years. It's been steadily moving west this whole time. So, we'll see.
Fingers crossed. All right. Well, no other questions at the moment. If I missed anything, folks, let me know. But I think we covered it all, and we are wrapping up onto 8 o'clock, just on the nose. So thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you, Arin, so much for your time. I learned a ton, and your photographs were lovely and just really engaging. I'm really glad a program like this exists, because it really highlights those little species that sometimes get overlooked in management. So
exactly.
Thank you for the work. Yeah, absolutely. Everyone's throwing you some thanks in the chat and kudos. I'm gonna stop the recording right now.